that would affect schools. And so we were able to engage an organization called PASA, and PASA, that's exactly what they do. In fact, we checked references and were subsequently referred to PASA by Bernie ISD, Schertz-Cibolo Universal City ISD, and Northside ISD in the area, who have continued to experience fast residential development or have in the last decade. And so in November of last year, they shared these findings with the board. And these findings included that over the next 5 years, there's going to be substantial residential development in the north sector of our district as well as the south sector of our district. And that caught the board's attention because the last demographic study that the board commissioned in the 2015 timeframe really suggested that most, if not all, of the residential development was going to be north of Highway 87. At that time, if you'll recall, the south area of the district around the 37 South Corridor, 181 area, it was a commercial corridor, and the oil field industry was really big in that area. Not a lot of residential development, and that's now changed. Projecting out to 2030, and I'll just kind of flip back and forth. You can see the colors. Red is the most prominent development, orange, yellow, and green, and so on. Those developments that are orange and red have the most number of homes available to residents to be occupied. And so what the demographer is suggesting is that over the next 10 years, that development is going to continue and there'll be more and more homes available as the years go by. And so with that, the demographer is able to project what enrollment growth was going to look like as a result. And historically, East Central has had what's called moderate enrollment growth, meaning that anywhere from 1% to 2% in a given year. So we might have experienced 80 new students on a lean year from pre-K to 12, and some years maybe over 100 students pre-K to 12. And what the demographer is projecting is it's beginning this year, going forward to 2030, that we're going to see numbers in the 4% up to 7%, and 400 plus students up to over 1,000 students in any given year, year over year over the next 10 years due to the residential development that's going on in our community. And that's going to impact schools in different areas of our district in very different ways. And so looking at our elementary schools, the areas where they begin to be highlighted represent the year during which those schools are going to reach 120% capacity. So 120% capacity is the standard for demographers to say your school is full, because that means that you occupy every space throughout the entirety of the day to teach students. So you use in every classroom to include that classroom when that teacher has a conference, you float other students into that space. You use your cafeteria when students aren't at lunch. You use your gyms when they're not being utilized for physical education. You use your library when it's not used for specials or when it's not during high traffic times. So at 120%, you're using every space all day for teaching and learning. And so Tradition is slated to hit that 120% capacity by 2023. In fact, the projected enrollment of 807 has already been exceeded this year, and so we have 3 pads that we're installing for double classroom portables, put 6 classroom portables in hopes of accounting for the rapid enrollment growth at Tradition. Harmony will be at 120% in 2026, and then shortly thereafter Oak Crest and Highland Forest. As far as our junior highs go, Legacy looks like it's in good shape with respect to where the developments are as our school boundaries are currently organized. But Heritage, on the other hand, is slated to reach 120% in 2024. And their current enrollment is right at, and actually on a daily basis, starting to exceed that projection as we speak. I think we're closer to 1,260 students now. And then at the high school, everybody in the community knows that over the years with different construction programs, we've been able to renovate the old Oak Crest, which has become South Campus, and John Glenn, which has become the John Glenn Annex of the high school. And so the high school is actually the entire facility from the stop sign by Elmendorf Cafe and South Campus all the way to Ag Road. And so for that reason, the enrollment capacity is much more substantial than even community members may perceive. We actually surveyed the community prior to engaging the Facility Study Committee, and their number one perception was that we needed another high school because our high school was overpopulated. When in fact, because of all the facilities we've been able to repurpose for high school students, we could actually make it out to 2030 before the high school reaches 120% capacity, which would be a very, very, very large high school. Currently, the high school is around 3,200 students. And so the most prominent recommendations, the most important ones that the demographer made to the board was that we're going to need an elementary school to accommodate that enrollment growth in 2023 in the north sector of our district, a junior high also in the north sector of the district by 2024, and an elementary school south by 2026. They do project that by the end of this demographic period, we'll need a third elementary in the north, but for the purposes of this bond program, it's not included in the proposal. And so at that point, when the board had a chance to really study this information, they engaged the community back in March of last year, and that community committee came together and worked from March through July to break into subcommittees and study the demographic report. They broke into 2 facility study committees, and half of them went to all of the elementary schools in the district. The other half really dove into the secondary schools and all of the other auxiliary facilities around the district. And a 4th committee studied the financial position of the district. They came back multiple times and reported to one another their findings, went through some exercises to establish some priorities, learn about the cost of what it would take to get some of this work done, and then began to have dialogue with the board. And after several kind of back and forth with the board having an opportunity to work together as a governing body, they finalized their proposal to the board, and the board accepted the proposal that I'm sharing with you tonight. And so the first 3 items on the bond referendum for consideration are an elementary school in the north, an elementary school in the south, and a middle school in the north. The 2 elementary schools will be using the Tradition Elementary plan as a template. We've gotten a lot of really good feedback from the community about the design of Tradition Elementary to include the size and the enrollment capacity. We did just finish a post-occupancy evaluation of Tradition so that the users of that space could inform us and our architects about the degree to which the space actually works in the way that they intended. And so there are some bits of feedback that we'll consider when redesigning the Tradition footprint for these elementaries to ensure that it better meets our needs. The middle school will be the same size as Legacy and Heritage, and at this time we're considering a newer, probably starting on the design from scratch. Heritage is over 20 years old, and Legacy is about 15 years old. Actually, like Heritage is about 25 years old, sorry. So the location of those proposed locations of these campuses are the North Elementary will be in the Shoeworth Road 1346 area of the community. The middle school will be on the same property as Tradition Elementary, and the South Elementary will be in the area of Loop 1604 and Highway 181. The committee also identified that in the 2016 bond construction program, that every elementary school was updated and renovated. And there were several aspects of those schools that the committee felt needed to be included in all of our elementary schools. And so Highland Forest and Oak Crest were not addressed in 2016. And so the recommendations that the committee made to the board and that the board is putting forward to the community are first, that we add an early learning center like we have at all of our elementary schools. The early learning center will add 12 classrooms, but in addition to that, the proposal includes some collaborative learning spaces where clusters of classrooms could share students and break them into smaller groups depending on what they need, and they could supervise that group in a collaborative learning space. And again, this is an amenity that's in all of our other elementary schools. The net difference between creating the collaborative learning spaces and adding the early learning classrooms is 8 additional classrooms at Highland Forest, meaning that we can serve an additional 160 students if we stay 160 plus, 160 to 200, depending if we stay at 22 to 1 or if class sizes are a little bit larger. So we're adding some capacity there. In addition, at Highland Forest, the queuing in front of the neighborhood and out on the Southeast Military, there's about 80 cars there in the afternoon that are waiting to pick up students, and they stack up, back up traffic on Military Drive in particular, and in the subdivision across the street from Highland Forest. We had the same problem at Sinclair that we were able to resolve with a additional driveway that goes around the back of the campus. Would be designed in a way to handle what we studied and determine is that approximate number of vehicles that needs to be queued off of the main drives to control traffic more safely and more efficiently. In addition to that, the campus would get some flooring replacement. We would put polished concrete floors and remove the LVT, which requires stripping and waxing regularly. So the maintenance of polished concrete floors is non-existent. Sweep and mop on a daily basis, which is what we have in all of our renovated campuses to include the high school. We found that it's much more durable and much less expensive to maintain. So we'd be able to do that. Energy efficient lighting, continue with our conversion to LED lights across the district, parking lots and interior. And then finishes, some paint, some refreshing of those finishes. And then ceiling mounted projectors like we have in all of our other elementary schools. So essentially the same amenities at Oak Crest. So the renovations would include those same major components. Probably the biggest difference at Oak Crest is at the drive. The queuing of traffic is impacted on Sulphur Springs, but not as substantially as it is in Highland Forest. So that study that ECPD did yields about the need to queue an additional 40 vehicles off of Sulphur Springs so that traffic can flow both directions on Sulphur Springs. So the design or the concept of that drive won't go around, which is beneficial to us because we have Heritage adjacent and wouldn't be able to do that quite as effectively. In addition to that, this is an opportunity as we redesign this space to add the Early Learning Center behind Oak Crest to add more appropriate playground facilities back there. At the high school, our goal as a school system is to make sure when kids graduate that they're both academically ready, but that they're also employable. It's a yes and, right? It's not one or the other in our school system. So the way that we prepare kids for the world of work is through our CTE programs. And so our goal has always been to identify the programs kids are really interested in, but also those that are aligned to the most high demand sectors in the local economy. So we pay attention to Texas Workforce Commission numbers. We work with the San Antonio Economic Development Foundation, and each and every year we align our programs again with where the jobs are in the local community and what kids are interested in. And so two of the most high demand in our system currently that align to the local economy are anything in the health professions, health sciences, as well as anything in the construction trades. And so adjacent to CAST, between CAST and the tennis courts, we have some property here where we have a converted gymnasium, which is a multi-purpose shop, advanced manufacturing, a lot of high-end welding and fabrication that goes on there with a lot of certifications that come with that for students. On that site, we'll be able to add a second multi-purpose facility, about 14,000 square feet, 14 to 15,000 square feet that will have some classroom space as well as shared lab space for students in any of these programs to be able to get relevant classroom experience and practice to earn industry certifications and be prepared to go either pursue their education beyond high school and start their career pathway, or start a career and then come back to an academic pathway, their choice. So this CTE multi-purpose facility will give us an opportunity to add a full slate of sections, 7 per day, in each of these 2 strands of health science and construction trades. All 3 of our other shops at the high school are full all 7 periods of the day. As we grow, we also need to be prepared to expand our bus fleet. And so the option there is to do some renovations to our current base 1 We have a centralized transportation facility at the high school. We also have a base 2 facility at the tradition site. But base 1 is where our maintenance and our bus repairs are done. And so the opportunity we have there is to take what is currently 6 shop bays where you can fit 1 bus in the bay at a time, so 6 buses. And the last 4 will be able to double the width, where you can add 4 more buses and have 10 bays instead of 6, giving us the opportunity in these 8 bays to have 2 buses nose to nose, a little more efficient setup for routine maintenance and repair. Back here is a wash rack. By doing this, you can add a second wash rack and you can wash 2 buses at the same time. In addition to that, in the center of that building, in the interior, over time we've grown, and that's become where our parts room, shipping and receiving is. It's where we train drivers, but it wasn't originally designed for that. So the flow of that space is not very efficient. It's not air conditioned. We make it work, but this is an opportunity to renovate that space, make it flow better, but also condition that space for the growing staff that's in that area. Our 2 junior highs, as I mentioned before, about 25 years old and 15 years old each. Heritage is in need of a little bit more attention than Legacy, but some of the things at Heritage that were pointed out were that flooring and restrooms needed to be replaced. All of the student restrooms are in very ill repair. And then there's a couple of visitor restrooms near the front of the campus that adults use mostly that need to be replaced as well. All of the flooring to polished concrete, paint finishes, HVAC controls, energy efficient lighting, as well as some canopies where the students leave the building to catch their bus. We have canopies on the east side where students leave the building to get picked up by their parents, so we'd want to mirror that on the west side. The original design of Heritage had 2 outdoor learning spaces that weren't designed in a way that were as functional. And so this is an opportunity to, with some slight redesign, make those functional for outdoor learning space utilization at Heritage. And then the front of the campus, parents drop off, pick up there, usually after hours, but it's also where our life skills students are dropped off and picked up. And in inclement weather or very hot weather, that presents an issue. It's an opportunity to put some canopy coverage out there as well. And then in the corridors, we haven't used when Heritage was built, lockers were still very popular at secondary level. We haven't used lockers at Heritage in probably 15 years. And so that's an opportunity to remove those, clean up those finishes, and it really widens out those hallways. Now it increases student flow and safety and supervision. So over at Legacy, again, not as substantial of need, but we need to address some finishes, some flooring. There is also outdoor learning space. It's actually larger than the ones at Heritage. That was designed as part of that space that also is not very functional. So with a minor redesign there, that could be an outdoor space that could be utilized. Proposing adding a second covered outdoor space on the north end of Legacy. But the most substantial finding was that there is no flat work or sidewalks from the building to the weight room, nor is there sidewalks from the campus to the field and track, nor is there any concrete underneath any of the bleachers or where parents or visitors sit with lawn chairs. And then lastly, there's not been a restroom facility out there. And so this is an opportunity to add the flat work as well as a standalone restroom facility for visitors to Legacy. And then lastly, the district has been leasing a warehouse since 1994. Currently, it's a little over $60,000 a year that we pay to lease that facility. In 1994, it was around $24,000 a year. We've changed the way we use the warehouse. We don't warehouse teacher supplies anymore. We drop ship those straight to departments and campuses. So our warehouse demand isn't what it was when we originally acquired this facility. It's about 14,000 square feet. However, we're at the mercy of the leaseor because we don't have an option should it get sold or should he increase the price to where it's completely unreasonable. We would be in a bad situation. So in addition to warehousing, which primarily consists of bringing in any equipment that needs to be asset tagged to include textbooks. So all of our textbooks come in when we have an adoption. It's massive, and for several weeks, those items are asset tagged, inventory controlled, and then distributed. So they don't stay there in the warehouse like supplies once did. But child nutrition is currently at ECDC. We repurposed ECDC in 2016, and their dry goods commodities are in what was once the cafeteria at ECDC. Now, ECDC is on the most southern point of our district and serves all campuses to include Tradition on the far north side of our district. We do have the need to have an additional dry goods commodities warehouse facility, and at the high school campus, this would be an optimal circumstance for serving the high school facility and any new campuses north to include Tradition and any future schools. And then lastly, this same location between our maintenance facility and CAST is also where ECPD currently is. ECPD's facility currently used to be our old boardroom and central office in 1951. It's pier and beam. It's a pretty aged facility. It's been repurposed over the years to be a police headquarters. Our policing model is that our officers are assigned to campuses. They office at the campus. They report to the campus. So our entire law enforcement team does not office out of that facility. It's chief, it's sarge, it's where we hold alternative education placement hearings for DAEP. It's where evidence is kept. It's where our dispatcher is, and then restrooms. So it's a pretty modest facility in terms of size, but it's inadequate in that it doesn't meet the standards for T-code specifications and requirements. So just one example is that the dispatcher has to be maintain confidentiality and be secured. Well, you can hear through those walls, and you have to pass by the dispatcher's facility to get to the break room or chief's office or the DAP hearing facility. So we make it work, but it doesn't quite rise to the standard of what's required. The evidence room was the old safe in central office. Safes aren't ventilated, and evidence runs the gamut in terms of what it could be. It could be chemicals. They need a certain standard of ventilation, and so the safe is not ventilated. And so we make it work, but those are all reasons why this particular facility, to include mold remediation that we've had to do in recent years, why this is an opportunity should we essentially replicate the 14,000 square foot warehouse that we currently use just for warehouse, no longer lease it, use the same square footage, make it a little more vertically accessible, where we can, shelve vertical. We can take care of warehousing needs. The front of that facility could be utilized to replace the ECPD headquarters. We could also do child nutrition, dry goods, commodities. And then lastly, right behind ECPD is our custodial office and custodial supplies and equipment storage. And that particular building is actually 2 concrete hotel rooms that we bought from H.B. Zachary, I believe in the early 70s when they were building the Palacio del Rio Hotel downtown. And they built them off-site, they furnished them, they craned them in there, and they plugged it into the structure, and within a short amount of time, you could actually occupy that room. The district bought 2 of those concrete blocks, if you will. We put them one on the left and one on the right, and we put a metal roof over it, and since then it's been what we've been using it for today. So custodial supply and equipment storage could also, those needs could also be addressed, again, all in the same 14,000 square foot space, and the district owns the property, so there would not be any expense there for property, and all the utilities are already on site. So this slide just represents a summary of all of the projects I presented to you tonight. The total bond referendum of $172,450,000, as well as a possibility of accomplishing some goals the board has for this project program. And that is to prioritize those that need to be occupied depending on when those needs are going to arise, but also cluster them in a way that takes advantage of us living in those buildings having school in those buildings during the next 3.5 years, and cluster them in a way that we could take advantage of holidays and summers in a way that, again, helps us deliver those buildings when we need them, but also takes advantage of the time in a way that makes sense so that we're not disrupting operations of the district in teaching and learning. And then lastly, not to access the total bond proceeds at one time. Access those bond proceeds in multiple points throughout the 3.5 years so that the tax impact to citizens is gradual as opposed to all at once. And so you might be asking, what is that probable tax impact? And the tax impact will not exceed 10.75 cents, will not exceed. It traditionally ends up being less than that, and I'll explain why. First of all, because it cannot exceed that, the Board of Trustees must make conservative assumptions about property value increases. In the last 5 years, it's been closer to 10%. And so for the first 2 years of the project program, the board is going to assume property values increasing at 7%, and then only 1% every year thereafter. So it's what's known as a conservative assumption. In addition to that, the bond interest rates are about half of that in the marketplace right now. So that we're doubling that again for a conservative assumption to guarantee that the tax impact will not exceed 10.75 cents by the end of the project program in 2025, not all at once. And so a little bit more on that. Just want to make sure that citizens are aware that your appraised value is not necessarily how your taxes are figured. If it's your primary residence, you get a homestead exemption of $25,000, and so your taxable value is actually the difference between your appraised value and that $25,000. And so depending on your home value, if you take the exemption and your taxable value, this would be the annual, the monthly, and the daily impact by 2025 of 10.75 cents to a homeowner in the district. As is always the case, anybody over the age of 65 who takes the homestead exemption and hadn't made any major improvements to their home is not impacted by any bond program in a community. So to give a little historical context of the district's M&O, INS, and total tax rate, the M&O rate is essentially our operating budget. The INS tax rate is the portion of citizens' tax bill that is utilized to pay back debt. And when you combine the two, M&O and INS, that's the total tax rate. And in East Central ISD, our $1.08 that the board adopted 2 months ago is substantially lower than the total tax rate of every other school district in Bexar County, and that's not new. It's been the case for at least 2 decades. In addition to that, the last bond program that was passed by this community was in 2016. At that time, the interest in sinking, or the portion of citizens' tax bill that was used to pay back debt, was 22.5 cents. And at that point, the maximum tax impact of the bond in 2016, which was about $86 million, was 16.5 cents. And so, not to exceed 16.5 cents. After the bond passed, the next year, the INS rate went up 2.5 cents. The second year after the bond passed, the INS rate went up an additional 5 cents. And then it began to go down to the 21 cents that we're at today. And so the total tax impact that the 2016 bond had was actually 7 cents. I want to make sure I'm counting on my fingers correctly. And so that's because of conservative assumptions. That's because over the course of a bond construction program, the district continues to pay down old debt. And as the tax base increases, old debt decreases. Generally speaking, the tax impact that we're not going to exceed is never exceeded. Certainly, it can't by law, but it's generally not reached. And so online, you can access this bond facts at a glance on the home page. Just click the bond information banner, and you can have access to this. Those in the audience tonight, you also have this handout. It's a summary of everything that I've shared with you tonight on one page. And so you'll see all of the projects, the cost, the tax impact. You'll see the problems that the committee identified that this program attempts to solve, and then the possible timeline that I shared with you this evening. Early voting is October 18th to the 29th, so right around the corner. Any citizen in the community that would like to vote in the November election has to be registered to vote by October 4th, or they won't be eligible to vote in either early voting or in the November election. And election day is on November 2nd. And so what I'd like to do is strongly encourage all citizens to get out and vote, because our turnout in this community is usually around 1,500 citizens. We have nearly 60,000 in the East Central community. So if you want more information, feel free to speak to any of the facility study committee members, give my office a call, speak to any of the trustees on the board. We'd be happy to share any and all information that the committee did over more than 3-month period of time. There's a lot more under the hood that led to this, and we'd be happy to share all of that to inform your decision come election day. But this is what the ballot's going to look like. It's completely transparent. It's identifies the total amount and every single project by name that I mentioned this evening, and specifies that this is a property tax increase. So it's intended to be clear, not ambiguous, very specific, and it's in English and Spanish. So this is what you'll be considering as a citizen in November. And so again, our homepage of our website has a banner that says bond information. Our notice of election, bond facts, this presentation, a list of all of the community presentations to include Facebook Lives and streaming events that have already been presented and that are going to be presented between now and the November election are available right there at that site. Talk to us tabs on any page on our website is a place where you can ask questions. As we receive questions about this referendum, we'll build out frequently asked questions and answer those so that the community has all the information that they need to make the decision that they intend to make in November. So be happy to answer any questions anyone with us in the audience tonight may have, or any questions that any of the folks online this evening may have had. We've got a couple of mics up front. Hello.
Hi. The only question I had was on you adding the middle school to traditions. The traffic on 1346 is already a nightmare.
Yep.
So starting at 2:30 actually.
Yep.
Are y'all going to redirect or add on to that so that the traffic is not just there?
Yeah, thank you. That's a fantastic question. So it requires, TxDOT will require us to do a traffic impact study, which is what we had to do to determine the degree of improvements we had to make on 1518 and 1346 based on the traffic flow that they anticipated in the study.
Okay.
So we're going to have to do an updated study now
because it's
with
crazy.
That. Yeah, and the recommendation for TxDOT might be, a traffic light. It might be informing the design about the kind of queuing that we'll put on the property so that vehicles are off 1346 and 1518 and on the property. There's an additional 35-ish acres behind Tradition where this middle school site would be. So it will all be informed by a TxDOT traffic impact study.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that question. Any others? Any online? None online? Okay. We'll be here after for a few minutes. If not, thank you for joining us this evening and have a wonderful evening. And again, there's a whole host of community presentations that are going to be happening over the next 2 months or so. And so I encourage you to tell your friends and neighbors to check those out. And if they haven't had a chance to hear the information, come on out. It's 30 minutes of good use of your time, I think, as a citizen in the community. And it's an important time for the East Central community. So thank you again for being here.